Hi everyone! Something a bit different for this video, ranking every F1 driver of the 2010s. It's quite a long list as you'd expect, and I should reiterate this is entirely subjective and just my opinion. I've been watching F1 since 2007 and I've watched all but only a handful of races live during the 2010s. It was a dramatic and eventful time for F1 that gave us innovations such as DRS, the F-duct, exhaust blown diffusers, hybrid engines, and of course penis noses. We saw Mercedes and Red Bull supersede Ferrari and McLaren as the teams to beat, the rise of drivers like Daniel Ricciardo and Max Verstappen, and the fall of drivers like Fernando Alonso and Jenson Button. I've tried to take into account performance statistics, but also the competitiveness of the cars that the drivers had at their disposal, and any major successes or failures they made in their careers. This is not necessarily an overall commentary of a driver's skills. I'm looking at drivers' performances from 2010 to 2019 only. So as far as this list is concerned, Sergio Perez and Pierre Gasly haven't won a race yet, and Michael Schumacher is not the unstoppable force he's usually remembered as. 66 drivers raced in F1 during the 2010s, so let's get into it. In 66th and last, we have Andre Lotterer. When it comes to Lotterer, there's very little data to work with. He started only one race, the Belgian Grand Prix in 2014, and it was for Caterham, who had the slowest car that year. He'd last driven a Formula 1 car in 2002 for Jaguar, but absolutely trounced teammate Marcus Ericsson in qualifying and beat him by over a second. But then, on the second lap of the race, he hit a bump too hard and the engine cut out. He was invited to race again at Monza, but turned it down because they planned to run Roberto Merri in FP1, which put a big dent in his preparation time. He's had long and successful careers in both the WEC and Formula E, so I have no doubts that he's a very talented driver, but Formula 1 just wasn't his thing. In 65th is Sakon Yamamoto. Yamamoto was an archetypal pay driver. His junior career was nothing to shout about, but he brought money, which meant he had brief stints with Super Aguri and Spiker before joining HRT midway through 2010. He wasn't particularly fast. He switched off the car halfway through a German Grand Prix and ran over a mechanic in the pit lane at the Italian Grand Prix. When the money eventually ran out, his seat was taken by Christian Klien, and a few years later he left motor racing completely and entered the world of politics. He had 7 starts, no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 15th at the 2010 Korean Grand Prix. Yamamoto's predecessor, Karun Chandhok, is next in 64th. Chandhok is a fantastic pundit and analyst who has had the opportunity to drive numerous iconic Formula 1 cars over the years, but his brief foray as a driver was not brilliant, nor was the car he was driving. He was slow and accident prone when driving for HRT in 2010. He was Lotus's reserve driver for 2011 and did one race where he spanned several times and was not called up to race again, even for the inaugural Indian Grand Prix. He had 11 starts, no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 14th at the 2010 Australian Grand Prix. The only other Indian Formula 1 driver follows in 63rd, the cucumber himself, Narain Karthikeyan. I'm actually quite fond of Karthikeyan. I always like an underdog, and he personified this as an HRT driver. Karthikeyan's junior career was reasonably decent, and the year he spent driving for Jordan in 2005 started strongly but gradually faded. He made a surprise return to Formula 1 aged 34 in 2011 for HRT. Their cars were massively uncompetitive. However, Karthikeyan did not help himself, as in 27 races he outqualified his teammate 3 times and outraced them twice. He also had a lack of awareness on track, as several times he blocked faster cars in qualifying and the race, which culminated in him giving Sebastian Vettel a puncture at the Malaysian Grand Prix in 2012. Despite not being very fast, he deserves credit for being the first Indian to break into the European-dominated world of Formula 1, and for being instrumental in getting the Indian Grand Prix off the ground. He did 27 races, had no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 15th at the 2012 Monaco Grand Prix. In 62nd is the 4th consecutive HRT driver, Christian Klien. Klien's main stint in Formula 1 was in the mid-2000s with Jaguar and Red Bull, but he had a brief swan song in 2010 with HRT. He fared better against Bruno Senna than Chandhok and Yamamoto had, but it was still a fairly unremarkable return. He did 3 races, got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 20th at the 2010 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Rio Haryanto, Formula 1's first and so far only Indonesian driver, is 61st. After spending 4 years in GP2, Haryanto was called up to drive for Manor in 2016. He was consistently slower than his highly rated teammate Pascal Wehrlein, but the gap gradually widened with each race and peaked with the Austrian Grand Prix, where Wehrlein scored the team's first points that year in 10th and Haryanto was 16th. He hung on for 3 more races before his sponsorship money dried out in the summer break and he was replaced by Esteban Ocon. In his 12 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 15th at the 2016 Monaco Grand Prix. In 60th is Lucas Di Grassi. Di Grassi did not have the easiest start to his career. He debuted with Virgin, who had a tiny budget and a car that initially couldn't carry enough fuel to fit his races, and he had an experienced and well-respected teammate in the form of Timo Glock. He was slower than Glock for most of the year, and occasionally got the better of him, but he broke the car's suspension in Germany, crashed into the barriers in the race at Korea, and crashed into the barriers before the race had even started in Suzuka. He was replaced for 2011, but has since gone on to enjoy massive success in Formula E. He did 18 races, got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 14th at the 2010 Malaysian Grand Prix. Roberto Merhi is 59th. Merhi had a reasonable junior career and signed for Marussia in 2015. He performed fairly well against teammate Will Stevens, but ultimately did little to stand out and started sharing his seat with Alexander Rossi towards the end of the year. Since then, he appears to have started doing his career in reverse and has had spells in Formula 2 and Formula Renault 3.5. He started 13 races, got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish for 13th at the 2015 Russian Grand Prix. In 58th is Merhi's teammate for 2015, Will Stevens. Stevens paid Caterham £500,000 to race for them in what would end up being their final race in Formula 1 at Abu Dhabi in 2014, though even that didn't save them from folding. He is able to jump ship to their main rivals Marussia for 2015, and was able to perform reasonably well by pay driver standards, but got shown up quite badly by Alexander Rossi, who came in at the end of the year. He did 18 races, got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 13th at the 2015 British Grand Prix. In 57th is Jerome D'Ambrosio. He replaced Di Grassi at Virgin for 2011, and had many of the same problems that he had of a slow, unreliable car and an experienced teammate. D'Ambrosio was a cleaner driver, however, who didn't make many errors but still wasn't very fast. He was Lotus's reserve driver for 2012 and did 1 race for them in place of Romain Grosjean and then moved on to Formula E. He did 20 races, got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 13th at the 2012 Italian Grand Prix. In 56th is the most recent American F1 driver, Alexander Rossi. Rossi's entry into F1 was a bit stop and start. He spent a couple of years testing for Caterham and Marussia. He was meant to make his debut at the Belgian Grand Prix in 2014, but the team changed their mind at the last minute. He then tried again 4 races later, but the team decided to run only 1 car out of respect for Jules Bianchi. He eventually did 5 races for Marussia at the end of 2015 and was pretty fast and competitive, but couldn't get a seat for 2016 and moved on to IndyCar. In his 5 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 12th at the 2015 United States Grand Prix. Guido van der Garde is 55th. Van der Garde's F1 debut was well overdue, and he performed pretty decently with Caterham in 2013, giving them their 2 highest qualifying places ever of 14th and 15th. He moved to Sauber as a test driver for 2014, and in March 2015 was involved in a long legal battle after he claimed he was contracted to race for them for that year, but they chose Marcus Ericsson and Felipe Nasr instead. He eventually gave in and left F1 for other ventures. In 19 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 14th at the 2013 Hungarian Grand Prix. Van der Garde's teammate at Caterham, Charles Pic, is 54th. The quiet, mild-mannered driver first spent a year at Marussia as Timo Glock's teammate in 2012. He generally performed better than Glock's previous 2 rookie teammates, but was still largely outclassed by the more experienced driver. He signed to race for Caterham in 2013, but angered his current team at the final race at Interlagos after he cost them 10th in the Constructors' Championship to their main rivals and his future team after losing 11th place to Vitaly Petrov in the late stages of the race. He did what he could with the 2013 Caterham, but points were never on the cards, and he broke the record for most overtaken driver in a season. 2 years later, he left motorsport and started a career in business and finance. He started 39 races, got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 12th at the 2012 Brazilian Grand Prix. In 53rd, we have the first driver on this list who spent a year in a team other than one of the 3 new teams in 2010, Sergei Sirotkin. Sirotkin spent a year at Williams in 2018, when they were deep into their gradual descent to the back of the grid. The whole year he was outclassed by his equally pay-driverish teammate Lance Stroll, but had one entertaining race at Singapore where he battled with Sergio Perez for several laps until Perez had enough and drove into the side of him. He did 21 races, got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest lap, 1 point, and a best finish of 10th at the 2018 Italian Grand Prix. Esteban Gutierrez is 52nd. Gutierrez drove for Sauber for 2 years and then a year with Haas. There was the odd strong race here and there, including a fastest lap at Catalunya and a 7th place finish at Suzuka in 2013, but his time in F1 was mostly fairly bland. Since his time as a racer though, he's become a valued asset for none other than Mercedes, working for them as a simulator and development driver and representing them in various esports series during the COVID-19 pandemic. In 59 races he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, 1 fastest lap, 6 points and a best finish of 7th at the 2013 Japanese Grand Prix. In 51st is the blonde bombshell Brendan Hartley. Hartley's F1 story was a story of patience and waiting. After a strong junior career, Hartley became Red Bull's test driver in 2008, but it would be almost 10 years before he eventually got a race seat. His year and a bit with Toro Rosso didn't give him much of a chance to show himself off. Almost every weekend he was beset either with grid penalties, mechanical problems, or was involved in accidents that usually weren't his fault. It was a difficult campaign that didn't leave much of an impression. He has, however, made up for this with great success in the WEC. In 25 races he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 4 points and a best finish of 9th at the 2018 United States Grand Prix. The first driver to break the top 50 is Jolyon Palmer. Palmer's 2 years in Renault weren't terrible, but he was just edged out by Kevin Magnussen in 2016 and absolutely trounced by Nico Hülkenberg in 2017. He lost his seat before the season's end to Carlos Sainz, but since then he has received critical acclaim for his work as a pundit and analyst for BBC Sport. In 35 races he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 9 points and a best finish of 6th at the 2017 Singapore Grand Prix. Italian Jesus is next in 49th. Antonio Giovinazzi did 2 crash-heavy races for Sauber in 2017 that he clearly wasn't ready for, but since 2019 he's been at Alfa Romeo alongside Kimi Raikkonen. 2019 was a fairly slow year. Raikkonen was well past his best but could still keep Giovinazzi at bay. He also famously binned the car on the penultimate lap of the Belgian Grand Prix while running in 9th. He continues to race for Alfa Romeo, but there are several other drivers in the Ferrari Driver Academy that deserve that seat a lot more. In 23 races he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 14 points and a best finish of 5th at the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix. In 48th is Pedro Della Rosa. Della Rosa was a seasoned veteran with tons of mileage as a test driver for McLaren when he returned to full-time racing for BMW Sauber in 2010. He was burdened by an unreliable car and was outclassed by teammate Kamui Kobayashi. He lost his seat midway through the season to Nick Heidfeld and returned to testing before selling his soul to HRT for 2012 to have one last chance at racing. He had no problems keeping Narain Karthikeyan at bay and occasionally challenged and beat the Marussias, but was lucky to break the top 20 in each race. He was in his 40s when he finally retired, and along with Michael Schumacher was the last driver left to have raced in the 90s. In 33 races he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 6 points and a best finish of 7th at the 2010 Hungarian Grand Prix. In 47th is Bruno Senna. Some sympathy should be given to drivers who have to carry the burden of a name like Senna. Senna's time in F1 wasn't terrible, but it came nowhere near that of his uncle's. He had to endure a year in a slow and unreliable HRT, though he did comfortably beat his 3 teammates that year. Half a season with Lotus didn't lend much, but he was fairly consistent, safe and dependable during 2012 with Williams, more so than his destructive and reckless teammate, whose performances could range anywhere from winning races to crashing out on the first lap. Ultimately though, just safe wasn't enough for Williams, and he was left without a drive for 2013. In 46 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 33 points, and a best finish of 6th at the 2012 Malaysian Grand Prix. Is that Glock in 46th? Timo Glock had a fairly good setup at Toyota, but after they abruptly pulled out of the sport, he was out of options other than the new Virgin team. He had 3 rookie teammates across all 3 years, all of which he beat comfortably, and he got the most out of a car that was never expected to finish higher than 19th. After 3 years of running around at the back, he decided he'd had enough and entered his contract early. In 55 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 12th at the 2012 Singapore Grand Prix. Antonio Liuzzi is 45th. Liuzzi was one of the early Red Bull Academy drivers whose career was essentially back to front. He started at Red Bull and finished at HRT. His year at Force India in 2010 was the most competitive of his relatively short career. He scored points on a semi-regular basis, but still scored less than half of those of his teammate Adrian Sutil. He then spent a year at HRT where he had no problems beating Narain Karthikeyan, but met his match with the young rookie Daniel Ricciardo. After losing his seat to Karthikeyan the following year, he eventually retired from motor racing and now runs a restaurant. In 36 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 21 points, and a best finish of 6th at the 2010 Korean Grand Prix. In 44th is Max Chilton. Chilton is yet another driver to have had a relatively quiet time driving around at the back during his career. As a Marussia driver, both the car and himself, however, proved to have bulletproof reliability as he became the first driver to finish every race in his rookie season. He eventually managed a streak of 25 consecutive finishes before colliding with his teammate on the first lap of the Canadian Grand Prix in 2014. He left Formula 1 after Marussia collapsed at the end of 2014, and after 35 races got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 13th at the 2014 Australian Grand Prix. In 43rd is Marcus Ericsson. Ericsson had a reasonably good run in F1. He raced for 5 seasons despite fairly average results. He spent most of his career near the back of the grid, first with Caterham and then with the struggling Sauber. There were brief moments of speed, but he was consistently outclassed by his teammates and had a tendency to crash, particularly in wet conditions. His days were numbered at the end of 2018, and after 97 races he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 18 points, and a best finish of 8th at the 2015 Australian Grand Prix. None other than Pastor Maldonado is 42nd. Maldonado is an iconic figure in Formula 1. His career is one of extreme highs and extreme lows. His junior career was very strong. He graduated to Formula 1 after winning the GP2 series. The peak of his time in F1 came when he inherited pole position from Lewis Hamilton at the 2012 Spanish Grand Prix, and then went on to win the race in a controlled and mature fashion, despite immense pressure from former champions Fernando Alonso and Kimi Raikkonen in the racing's dying stages. However, what he is most remembered for is being one of the most destructive, reckless and crash-heavy drivers in the history of the sport. Numerous points finishes were thrown away by him crashing on his own or into other drivers. In 5 years in Formula 1, he never finished the 2 season-opening Australian and Malaysian Grand Prix, and crashed out of the Monaco Grand Prix in 3 of 4 attempts. At Williams, he could occasionally perform exceptionally in qualifying and races, but his final 2 years with Lotus were just dreadful, with crashes coming on a regular basis in practice, qualifying and the race, some of which were intentional as he was short-tempered with the action of other drivers. Eventually, the F1 paddock had had enough, and his sponsorship money from the Chavez government could save him no more. In 95 races, he got 1 win, 1 podium, 1 pole position, no fastest laps and 76 points. In 41st is Jean-Eric Vergne. Vergne succeeded Jaime Alguersuari and Sebastian Buemi at Toro Rosso in 2012 along with Daniel Ricciardo. He was a safe driver, though outclassed by his 2 hotshot teammates Ricciardo and Daniel Kvyat. At the end of 2014, Kvyat was promoted to Red Bull, however Vergne was dropped. He then moved on to Formula E where he has won the driver's title twice. In 58 races he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 51 points and a best finish of 6th at the 2014 Singapore Grand Prix. Breaking the top 40 is Jarno Trulli. Trulli was at the tail end of his long career when Toyota collapsed and he signed for the revamped Lotus team in 2010. His 2 years in this highly uncompetitive team were plagued with mechanical problems that rarely affected his teammate Heikki Kovalainen, who was also consistently faster. Nonetheless, he brought great experience to the team which helped them to resoundingly beat their fellow backmarker rivals Virgin and HRT. When he retired at the end of 2011, he was the 4th most experienced driver in Formula 1 history with 252 race starts. In 36 races with Lotus, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 13th at the 2010 Japanese Grand Prix and the 2011 Australian and Monaco Grand Prix. Sebastian Buemi is 39th. Buemi is one of the most prolific drivers from the Red Bull Academy. He was solid and dependable in his 3 years driving for midfield B team Toro Rosso, with his most memorable moment being when the front wheels yeeted from the car at the end of the back straight at Shanghai in 2010. He never drove for the A team, as he was surprisingly and rather unfairly axed by the team at the end of 2011. Post Formula 1, he has gone from strength to strength, winning titles in the WEC and Formula E. He is still a part of the Red Bull family, doing development work for them, and he recently drove at the Young Drivers Test, 13 years after he first drove an F1 car. In 38 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 23 points, and a best finish of 8th at the 2010 Canadian Grand Prix and 2011 Australian and Hungarian Grand Prix. Coming in at 38th is Buemi's teammate at Toro Rosso, Jaime Alguersuari. Alguersuari's career is interlocked with Buemi's. They drove at the same team for 2 years and were both axed at the same time. Alguersuari was first noted for his youth. He became the youngest driver in F1 history when he debuted in 2009 aged 19, which today is not considered abnormally young. He was a bit shaky against Buemi in 2010, but really came into his own in 2011. However, there was nothing he could do about the incoming freight train that was Daniel Ricciardo, and his career ended just when it was getting started. Unlike Buemi, he has not enjoyed racing success post Formula 1. After a year in Formula E in 2015, he left motorsport completely and became a nightclub DJ called Squire. In 38 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 31 points, and a best finish of 7th at the 2011 Italian and Korean Grand Prix. In 37th is the Vyborg rocket Vitaly Petrov. Petrov made history in 2010 as Formula 1's first ever Russian driver, forming an all-Slavic lineup at Renault alongside Robert Kubica. His debut season was tentative, and he was almost never on par with his exceptionally talented teammates. In 2011, he got his first and only podium, and was beaten in the first half of the season by new teammate and former teammate of Kubica, Nick Heidfeld, though not as badly, and in the second half of the season used his growing experience to outperform Bruno Senna. His career took a step back by moving to Caterham for 2012, but he provided a good challenge to Heikki Kovalainen and finished higher in the standings after seizing the key 11th place they needed at the final race to give the team 10th in the Constructors' Championship. In 57 races, he got no wins, 1 podium, no poles, no fastest laps, 64 points, and a best finish of 3rd at the 2011 Australian Grand Prix. In 36th is Lance Stroll. Opinion is highly divided regarding Lance Stroll. By all accounts, he is a pay driver, having a billionaire father who, in one of the most obvious examples of nepotism in the sport's history, bought a share in Racing Point at the end of 19 and gave his son a seat that many felt he didn't deserve. And no doubt, access to that kind of money does smoothen your ascension through the motorsport ranks somewhat. But Stroll has 3 junior titles to his name, and is very quick when driving well. Qualifying is not his strong point, but he is very good in the wet, and is also an opportunistic racer who can put himself in advantageous positions in unpredictable races filled with safety cars and retirements. It has no effect on this list, but 2020 was his breakthrough year with 2 podiums and his first ever pole position. From 2017 to 2019, he started 62 races, got no wins, 1 podium, no poles, no fastest laps, 67 points, and a best finish of 3rd at the 2017 Azerbaijan Grand Prix. Heikki Kovalainen is 35th. In only his second year in F1, Kovalainen was dealt a bad hand, shall we say, by being paired up against Lewis Hamilton. He failed to perform equal to the task and moved to the back of the grid with the new Lotus team for 2010. Despite what at a glance his results may show, Kovalainen drove exceptionally. He had an almost perfect qualifying record against his teammates Jarno Trulli and Vitaly Petrov, and was rarely beaten on pure pace. He also occasionally had the pace to tangle with the lower midfield teams like Williams and Toro Rosso, but unlike them was never fast enough to score points. He filled in for Kimi Raikkonen for 2 races at the end of 2013 and then moved on to Super GT, where he remains. In 59 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 12th at the 2010 Japanese Grand Prix. In 34th is Pascal Wehrlein. Wehrlein's brief career in Formula 1 can best be described as anticlimactic. He debuted with backmarker Team Manor as a Mercedes Academy driver in 2016. He had no problems beating teammate Rio Haryanto and scored the team's only points that year. Haryanto's replacement Esteban Ocon was much more of a match to Wehrlein, and both were seen as future stars. When Nico Rosberg unexpectedly announced his retirement at the end of 2016, Wehrlein was a potential candidate to take his seat at Mercedes, but it went to Valtteri Bottas instead. He instead joined Sauber, who were only marginally more competitive than Manor had been. He missed the first 2 races because of injury, and across the season scored 5 points to teammate Marcus Ericsson's 0. Despite this, Ericsson was kept for 2018, but Wehrlein was shockingly dropped, ending his F1 career abruptly early. In 39 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 6 points, and a best finish of 8th at the 2017 Spanish Grand Prix. Not to be confused with Felipe Massa, Felipe Nasr is 33rd. Nasr had a very strong debut for Sauber, where he finished 5th just days after the closure of a heated legal battle the team was fighting with Guido van der Garde. points were semi-regular and he far outscored teammate Marcus Ericsson. In 2016, Ericsson miraculously found his form and the two drivers were much closer. Financial problems meant the team were much less competitive and ran behind Manor in the standings for most of the year until NASA saved the team by finishing 9th at the very wet Brazilian Grand Prix. Despite this, he was kicked from the team at the end of that year. In an interview in 2020, NASA claimed the reason Ericsson was suddenly closer to him in 2016 was because the team was bought the previous year by Longbow Finance, who had deeply invested in Ericsson. And throughout the year they went as far as to sabotage NASA's car and delay giving him new parts and upgrades in order to give the illusion that Ericsson was faster. If these claims are true, it's a reminder of the power that money holds in shaping the Formula 1 grid. In 39 races he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 29 points and a best finish of 5th at the 2015 Australian Grand Prix. In 32nd is Nick Heidfeld. Quick Nick competed throughout the entire 2000s, including 5 years of BMW Sauber, getting several podiums but never a win. His seat at BMW Sauber was lost for 2010, however he was brought in at the end of the season to take over from Pedro Della Rosa. He was dropped again at the end of the year and was in contention with Bruno Senna to take the injured Robert Kubica's seat at Lotus Renault for 2011, which he eventually won. He got a podium at Sepang and scored points on a regular basis in the R31 with its innovative forward-facing exhausts. But post-summer break he was dropped again and replaced with Bruno Senna, ending his long career without a win. In 16 starts he got no wins, 1 podium, no poles, no fastest laps, 40 points and a best finish of 3rd at the 2011 Malaysian Grand Prix. In 31st is Stoffel Vandoorne. Like with Felipe Nasr, Stoffel Vandoorne is another driver who was underrated and left the sport before they had time to fulfil their full potential. He's another driver who had an amazing junior career, completely running away with the GP2 title in 2015. He impressed a lot with his last-minute call-up to replace Fernando Alonso at Bahrain in 2016. He then joined the team full-time alongside Alonso the following year. His results at first looked fairly average, but he was driving very well considering the team had been in pieces for the past 3 years and his teammate was one of the greatest F1 drivers of all time. But a bottleneck of young talent towards the end of the decade meant he got squeezed out. He has a lifeline as a cog in the Mercedes machine, and was a runner-up for them in Formula E in 2020. In 41 races he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 26 points and a best finish of 7th at the 2017 Singapore and Malaysia Grand Prix. Beginning the top 30 is Adrian Sutil. Sutil was once a highly regarded racer who has since almost completely vanished from public consciousness. Sutil was one of Force India's most seasoned drivers and also drove for them under their previous iteration of Spiker. He had 3 very strong years at Force India where he was a force to be reckoned with in the midfield. A year at the declining Sauber team in 2014 landed no points and his career slowly petered out, with his last notable moment being getting caught up in Jules Bianchi's fatal accident. Since 2013 he has not been racing professionally, and aside from totalling a very expensive McLaren Senna LM in the summer of 2020, he has been almost completely absent from social media and made almost no public appearances. In 76 races he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 118 points and a best finish of 5th at the 2010 Malaysian and Belgian Grand Prix and 2013 Monaco Grand Prix. In 29th is Rubens Barrichello. Barrichello's 2 years at Williams give only a glimpse of his very long career. It was a quiet 2 years. He generally outdrove and outscored his rookie teammate Nico Hülkenberg in 2010, aside from Hülkenberg's remarkable pole position at Interlagos, and diced back and forth with his old teammate Michael Schumacher, who almost killed him at the Hungaroring. The 2011 car was far less competitive and he scored only 2 times. He showed his vast experience though compared to his new rookie teammate Pastor Maldonado. When he retired at the end of 2011, he was the most experienced driver in Formula 1 history. In 38 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 51 points, and a best finish of 4th at the 2010 European Grand Prix. In 28th is George Russell. So far, we've only seen a tiny fraction of George Russell's potential, and his rookie year in 2019 gave us very little of what he's truly made of. The car was by far the slowest that year. It improved with time, but Russell and teammate Robert Kubica were still basically in their own race. Despite this, Russell maintained a perfect qualifying record against Kubica, who was a mere shadow of his former self at this point, and he was a clean racer. He retired only twice, once from a crash that wasn't his fault and once from a brake failure. He's clearly a future star, but this wasn't the car to show it. In 21 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, no points, and a best finish of 11th for the 2019 German Grand Prix. Kevin Magnussen is in 27th. Magnussen had an interesting career path. It started strongly and gradually got worse. He had one of the best debut performances in Formula 1 history by finishing second at Albert Park, but that proved to be his only podium. After a one-year sabbatical, he spent a relatively unsuccessful year at Renault and then went on to Haas. The performance of the cars and the team went wildly up and down, and he could go from qualifying and finishing top 5 to struggling not to finish last. The team environment slowly soured as Magnussen and teammate Romain Grosjean would tangle on track, openly complain about the cars, and have pit stops botched and an increasing number of mechanical problems. He generally proved to be more reliable and dependable than Grosjean, but wasn't as fast. In 102 races, he got no wins, 1 podium, no poles, 2 fastest laps, 157 points, and a best finish of second at the 2014 Australian Grand Prix. Coming in like a torpedo at 26th is Daniel Kvyat. Kvyat is one of several drivers who have lived their careers at the mercy of Helmut Marko. He debuted for Toro Rosso in 2014, and after Vettel left the team, he took a seat at Red Bull for the following year. He fulfilled his role well, scoring points regularly on 1 podium, though generally slower than teammate Daniel Ricciardo. 2016 did not start so well. His car broke down before the start of the season opener at Australia. He got a podium in China, where he earned the nickname Torpedo from Vettel after he swept through both Ferraris at the start of the race and caused them to collide. At the following race at Sochi, however, he crashed into Vettel twice into 2 corners, and for the Spanish Grand Prix he was demoted back to Toro Rosso and swapped seats with Max Verstappen, who won the race. He refound his mojo a bit at his old team, but got dropped before the end of 2017 in favour of Pierre Gasly. He then returned in 2019, with the main highlight being a podium at the chaotic German Grand Prix. In 93 starts, he got no wins, 3 podiums, no poles, 1 fastest lap, 170 points, and a best finish of second at the 2015 Hungarian Grand Prix. In 25th is Paul di Resta. Di Resta had a fantastic CV when he entered Formula 1 in 2011 as the reigning DTM champion. In his 3 years at Force India, he was a consummate professional, though he thought very highly of himself, and he kept his teammates reasonably honest. He did develop a reputation for his bizarre race strategies, stopping at nothing to do fewer pit stops than everyone else. This made him one of the most passive drivers on the grid, rarely fighting or overtaking anyone else because he was constantly managing his tyres even more than was already required. It worked most of the time, but the gains were small. He did a one-off race for Williams at Hungary in 2017 after being called up last minute to cover Felipe Massa. He amazed everyone by qualifying 19th in a car he'd never driven before using Massa's setup, but the brakes gave way just before the checkered flag. After this, he resumed his duties as a Sky Sports pundit. In 59 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 121 points, and a best finish of 4th at the 2012 Singapore Grand Prix and 2013 Bahrain Grand Prix. The late Jules Bianchi is 24th. Bianchi was a star. He was a last-minute addition to the struggling Marussia team for 2013, but quickly proved he was the real deal. His only realistic competitors were his teammate Max Chilton and the Caterhams of Charles Pic and Guido van der Garde, but they could barely touch him in qualifying in the race. In 2014, he continued to lead the backmarkers and stunned everyone by finishing 9th at the Monaco Grand Prix, 2 laps ahead of Chilton, which would have been 8th if not for a 5-second time penalty. After 3 years of trying, he'd finally given the team their first points. He looked set to eventually drive for Ferrari, but it was not to be. At the wet Japanese Grand Prix, he crashed helmet first into a crane removing Adrian Stittil's car from the gravel trap. He lapsed into a coma and died 9 months later. In 34 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 2 points, and a best finish of 9th at the 2014 Monaco Grand Prix. May he rest in peace. Alex Albon is 23rd. Albon was an unexpected entry to the grid in 2019. He finished 3rd in Formula 2 the previous year. He had been set to move to Formula E, but scrapped that when an offer was made at Toro Rosso. He settled in well and was competitive against Daniel Kvyat. After the summer break, he swapped seats with Pierre Gasly at Red Bull. He settled in quickly and was much faster than Gasly had been, and highly aggressive in his racecraft, but had a potential podium at Brazil taken by a clash with Lewis Hamilton. He showed he could adapt well and race hard. In 2020, however, he put in an even more abysmal run than Gasly had and is now without a seat. In 21 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 92 points, and a best finish of 4th at the 2019 Japanese Grand Prix. In 22nd is Pierre Gasly. Gasly is another product of the Red Bull Driver Academy. He was brought in with Brendan Hartley to Toro Rosso at the end of 2017. He had a much better time of it in 2018 and impressed many with a 4th place at Bahrain, including Red Bull themselves, who promoted him to the A team for 2019. This, however, was a bad move. Teammate Max Verstappen was fighting for podiums and wins, while Gasly was scrapping around in the upper midfield for the final points places. After he got lapped by Verstappen at Hungary, the team had had enough and demoted him back to Toro Rosso. He immediately refound his form here and took 2nd place from Lewis Hamilton in a photo finish at the Brazilian Grand Prix. Then, a year later, he went one better and won his first race. In 47 races, he got no wins, 1 podium, no poles, 2 fastest laps, 124 points, and a best finish of 2nd at the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix. Lando Norris is 21st. Norris is revolutionising the way drivers present themselves and interact with fans. He's highly active on social media, shares memes, and streams on Twitch. He's also fairly good out on track. He joined McLaren in 2019 just as they started climbing out of the hole they'd spent most of the hybrid era in. It was a pretty good rookie year. Points came on a regular basis. A few, such as a 5th place in Spa, were taken from him by reliability problems, and he wasn't far off the pace of his more experienced teammate Carlos Sainz. In 21 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 49 points, and a best finish of 6th at the 2019 Bahrain and Austrian Grand Prix. We've now reached the top 20, where we really start getting into the big leagues of F1. First up is Robert Kubica. Going into the 2010s, Robert Kubica had spent 4 good years at BMW Sauber and was a proven race winner. He moved to Renault for 2010, and in the 5th best car on the grid got 3 podiums and regular points. He was set to remain there for 2011 and then go to Ferrari for 2012. However, his racing career came abruptly to a halt. In the winter break, he was involved in a massive rallying accident in which an Armco barrier went through the car and partially severed his right arm. It was believed that he would never race in Formula 1 again. However, he began to do informal testing in 2017, and then in 2018 became Williams' official test driver. He then returned to a race seat with them for 2019. It, however, was not a fruitful season. The car was massively uncompetitive, and several years out of the cockpit, plus the still visible injury to his right arm, meant his young hotshot teammate George Russell outqualified him at every race, and he almost always finished last. He's now a test driver for Alfa Romeo, but everyone has been left wondering what could have been had he not had that rally accident. In 40 races, he got no wins, 3 podiums, no poles, 1 fastest lap, 137 points, and a best finish of 2nd at the 2010 Australian Grand Prix. In 19th, it is none other than Michael Schumacher. A name everyone knows. In any other list about Formula 1, Michael Schumacher would be a contender for the number 1 spot. Until recently, he held most records in Formula 1, and he was an unstoppable force when he drove for Ferrari in the early 2000s. He retired in 2006, but shocked everyone when he announced his return to Formula 1 with Mercedes in 2010, forming an all-German lineup with Nico Rosberg as a German team. His return was highly anticipated, and people were eager to see if he still had his legendary pace. It proved ultimately to be an unsuccessful and largely fruitless return. He was now in his 40s and was no longer driving the fastest car on the grid. He also had a young, vibrant teammate who had no interest in playing second fiddle in the way that Rubens Barrichello had. He scored just over a third of the team's points in 2010 and got 0 podiums to Rosberg's 3, despite his penchant for playing mind games on his teammate. 2011 was a much more even fight between the two, and he had an epic battle for second place at the end of the rain-soaked Canadian Grand Prix with Jenson Button and Mark Webber, eventually finishing 4th. 2012 gave him the best and worst results of his Mercedes tenure. He had numerous reliability issues and got involved in several accidents. Early on, a potential Mercedes 1-2 at Shanghai was taken away by a botched pit stop. He showed the Schumacher of old with a stunning pole lap at Monaco. However, a 5-place penalty for a collision with Bruno Senna at the previous race took that away. He made up for this, however, by getting the only podium of his return at Valencia, and then the fastest lap at the Hockenheimring. He bowed out quietly for a second time at the end of the year, approaching his 44th birthday. Just over a year later, he was involved in a skiing accident in which he sustained severe head injuries and was comatose for several months. He has not been seen in public since, and specific details regarding his prognosis and condition have not been disclosed to the public. In 58 races, he got no wins, 1 podium, no poles, 1 fastest lap, 197 points, and a best finish of 3rd at the 2012 European Grand Prix. Keep fighting, Michael. In 18th is Kamui Kobayashi. There has been a steady stream of Japanese drivers in Formula 1 over the past 30 years. A lot of them have had a penchant for being blindingly fast, but also highly destructive. Kamui Kobayashi had both of these in leaps and bounds. He did 2 races for Toyota at the end of 2009, and then moved to BMW Sauber for 2010. The start of the season was difficult, as Kobayashi was fast, but the car was unreliable and he often got involved in accidents. As he got into a rhythm, it became clear that he was an outstanding overtaker. At the Japanese Grand Prix, he overtook 7 drivers at the hairpin without DRS. Over the next 2 years, he became a force to be reckoned with in the midfield, a menace to the drivers and hugely entertaining for the spectators. Points in 2012 were harder to find, but he got the only podium of his career at the Japanese Grand Prix. He was out of a job for 2013, but returned with Caterham in 2014. Ultimately, it was a bland year in which he comfortably beat teammate Marcus Ericsson, but didn't have the car to challenge anyone else. In 73 races, he got no wins, 1 podium, no poles, 1 fastest lap, 122 points, and a best finish of 3rd at the 2012 Japanese Grand Prix. In 17th is Romain Grosjean. It's easy to see Grosjean as being more or less in the same league as Pastor Maldonado, fast but reckless, but I think there's more to it than that. Grosjean had one of the best junior careers of any driver ever, winning titles in Formula Lister Junior 1.6, French Formula Renault, the Formula 3 Euro Series and the GP2 Asia Series. He filled in at Renault in 2009 after Nelson Piquet Jr. was fired, but span a lot, was very slow and clearly wasn't ready for Formula 1. He went back to feeder formulas, won the AutoGP Championship, the GP2 Asia Series for a second time, and then the GP2 Series proper. He was given a second chance with Renault, now under the guise of Lotus Renault for 2012, alongside former champion Kimi Raikkonen. Straight out of the box, he proved he was ready by qualifying 3rd at the opening race, only to then crash on the second lap. He got his first podium at Bahrain. He was set to get his first win at Valencia until the car broke down. Despite his great speed, there were several crashes and collisions with other drivers throughout the year, the most notable of which was at Spa, where he took out Lewis Hamilton, Fernando Alonso, Sergio Perez and Pastor Maldonado, for which he was then banned from the next race. 2013 was a big improvement and the best year of his career. He got 6 podiums and almost won at Suzuka. Lotus did not adjust well to the hybrid era, and the only highlight of the 2 lacklustre crash-filled years was a podium at Spa in 2015. For 2016 he moved to the new Haas team. He started strong by finishing 6th and 5th in the first 2 races, but after this the team gradually declined. The car was getting slower, Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen would clash on and off track, and team morale and cohesion started crumbling. Grosjean left Formula 1 in 2020 after his career quite literally went up in flames. A fast and clearly very talented driver, but also short-tempered and clumsy. In 159 races, he got no wins, 10 podiums, no poles, 1 fastest lap, 388 points, and a best finish of 2nd at the 2012 Canadian Grand Prix and 2013 United States Grand Prix. In 16th is another Frenchman, Esteban Ocon. Ocon was brought in as a replacement for Rio Haryanto at Manor in 2016, midway through his first year of DTM. He was fast and clean and moved to Force India for 2017. 2017 was a stunning year. He scored points in all but 2 races and had a run of 27 consecutive race finishes that ended courtesy of Romain Grosjean at the Brazilian Grand Prix. 2018 was a little shakier. He was caught up in first lap collisions 3 times, one of which was with his teammate Sergio Perez, who he clashed with several other times that year. He was shockingly left without a seat for 2019, but returned in 2020, though he is still a bit rusty from his year off. In 50 races, he got no wins, no podiums, no poles, no fastest laps, 136 points, and a best finish of 5th at the 2017 Spanish and Mexican Grand Prix. In 15th is Carlos Sainz. Sainz debuted with Toro Rosso alongside young hotshot Max Verstappen in 2015. He drove admirably but was largely outpaced by Verstappen. The following year, Verstappen would get promoted to Red Bull, while Sainz would spend the next year and a half with Toro Rosso until replacing Jolyon Palmer at Renault towards the tail end of 2017. 2018 was a strong year where he was close to teammate Nico Hülkenberg and often finished best of the rest behind the three leading teams, with the high point being 5th at the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. For 2019, he moved to McLaren where he formed an iconic bromance with Lando Norris. There were numerous races where he charged through the field from the back with little to no TV coverage, not least of which at the Brazilian Grand Prix, which he inherited his first podium following a penalty for Lewis Hamilton, preventing him from even attending the podium ceremony. In 2020, he almost got his first win, and this year he debuts with Ferrari. In 102 races, he got no wins, 1 podium, no poles, 1 fastest lap, 267 points, and a best finish of 3rd at the 2019 Brazilian Grand Prix. In 14th is Nico Hülkenberg. The Hulk was a staple of the midfield for the entire 2010s. He debuted with Williams in 2010 after winning the GP2 series. It was a decent first year, which is most remembered of him stunning everyone with a pole in the wet at Interlagos, although in the race he finished 8th. He moved to Force India to be their test driver for 2011, and then was promoted to a race seat for 2012. He scored points regularly, and at the rain-affected final race in Brazil, he was a contender for the win until a collision with Lewis Hamilton put him back to 5th. He moved to Sauber for 2013 and again picked up a good points haul. For 2014, he moved back to Force India and finished 5th 4 times. 2015 was weaker, the car was less competitive and he crashed several times, including going head-on into the barriers at Turn 1 in Hungary, though he still managed to take time out to win Le Mans. 2016 was better, but twice podiums slipped away from him with a botched pit stop in Monaco and a puncture in Brazil. For 2017 he moved to Renault, again a competitive midfielder who once again lost a potential podium with a pit stop blunder in Mexico. 2018 started well but gradually got weaker, with Hülkenberg causing a Romain Grosjean style pile-up at La Source at Spa and then being flipped upside down by Grosjean at Abu Dhabi. For 2019 the car was less competitive and also more unreliable, and once again he blew another podium opportunity by spinning off in the wet at Germany. Renault dropped him at the end of the season, leaving him without a drive. Hülkenberg became a bit of an almost man. He blew numerous opportunities for podiums through either his own errors or strategy blunders, and had several teammates who scored podiums on a semi-regular basis. He holds the record for most starts without a podium. Nonetheless, he spent most of his career at the sharp end of the midfield, and was a very good qualifier, but never really had a car that could fully challenge the frontrunners. A few stand-in performances for Racing Point in 2020 helped to redeem his image, and we may see him again in the future. In 177 races, he got no wins, no podiums, 1 pole, 2 fastest laps, 511 points, and a best finish of 4th at the 2013 Korean Grand Prix and 2016 Belgian Grand Prix. In 13th is another seasoned midfielder, Sergio Perez. Perez debuted with Sauber in 2011. It was a bit of a shaky start. He was disqualified at the first race and was knocked unconscious after a crash at Monaco. He turned a lot of heads in 2012 with a near win in Malaysia where he was chasing down Alonso in the closing stages but ran wide. He proved to be a master of tyre management by getting podiums in Canada and Italy after saving his tyres for a final sprint. He got a chance with the front-running team in 2013 with McLaren, but ultimately it was a disappointing year as they were on the decline and he could be excessively aggressive on track with teammate Jenson Button. For 2014 he began a long-standing partnership with Force India. He picked up podiums where teammate Nico Hülkenberg couldn't. He and later teammate Esteban Ocon didn't see eye to eye and often banged wheels. In 2018, when Force India was on the verge of collapse, he made a huge personal donation which allowed the team to live on under the guise of Racing Point. He spent a final year with them in 2020, where after long last he finally got his first win, which was enough for him to seal a seat with Red Bull for 2021. In 176 races he got no wins, 8 podiums, no poles, 4 fastest laps, 581 points, and a best finish of 2nd at the 2012 Malaysian and Italian Grand Prix. Felipe Massa is 12th. Massa was never the same after his near-fatal accident at Hungary in 2009. He had been a seasoned race winner and title challenger before this, but when he returned to racing for 2010 he clearly lost his edge. As a Ferrari driver, he was part of one of the big 3 teams that were fighting for wins and championships, but for the most part he just wasn't fast enough to keep up with the other 5 drivers. He had a few podiums here and there. He could have won at Germany in 2010, but Fernando was faster than him. He moved to Williams for 2014 and seemed rejuvenated as he was now the senior driver with a rookie teammate. It was mostly very good. Mercedes were untouchable, but podiums happened from time to time. He got pole at Austria in 2014 and he and teammate Valtteri Bottas led the early stages of Silverstone in 2015 before eventually succumbing to Mercedes. He announced his retirement at the end of 2016 and had an emotional send-off for Brazil. Then Nico Rosberg retired, Bottas took a seat and Massa stayed for another year. Most of his career happened post-accident, but he'll be best remembered as a nominal champion for the best part of 40 seconds. In 155 races, he got no wins, 13 podiums, 1 pole, 2 fastest laps, 847 points, and a best finish of second at the 2010 Bahrain and German Grand Prix, 2012 Japanese Grand Prix, and 2014 Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. In 11th is Mark Webber. Webber was the first significant Australian driver for a generation when he entered F1 in 2002. He joined Red Bull in 2007 and in 2009 received a young hotshot teammate named Sebastian Vettel. Before this, he'd driven midfield cars, but with the new regulations he had a fast enough car to win races and challenge for titles. For 2010, Red Bull had the outright fastest car, so fast it could fly. The team were clearly favouring Vettel, who was faster but also a bit clumsier, crashing into Webber at Turkey. At Silverstone, Webber had the new front wing taken off of his car and put on Vettel's after Vettel broke his old one. Webber went on to win the race, which wasn't bad for a number 2 driver. As the season approached its end, he was becoming the favourite to win the title, but he threw it away by crashing out in the rain at Korea, and the title eventually went to his teammate. In 2011, he only managed to win the final race of the year and was never in the title fight, despite sharing the same car as the man who stormed away with it. 2012 was even worse. He got 2 wins, but podiums were rare. By 2013, it was clear he was getting sick of the favouritism towards Vettel, and the final nail in the coffin came at the second round at Sepang, where Vettel disobeyed team orders to maintain position and passed Webber to take the win. After this, he decided he'd had enough and retired at the end of the year. He was without question the second driver at Red Bull, but he also just wasn't fast as Vettel on most days, often by a considerable margin. He could qualify well but often blew it, as his race starts were poor at best, and more than often he would trigger the anti-stall when the lights went out, forcing him to scrap around with slower cars while Vettel disappeared over the horizon. But compared to some of the other second drivers Red Bull has produced, he did fairly well and was able to regularly pick up points and came very close to being champion. In 77 races, he got 7 wins, 32 podiums, 11 poles, 15 fastest laps, and 878 points. It's time for the top 10, the very best of the 2010s. First up is Kimi Raikkonen. As well as being a major figure in Formula 1 in the 2010s, the Iceman also was in the 2000s. He made 2 good attempts at the title with McLaren in 2003 and 2005, and then won it on his 3rd attempt with Ferrari in 2007. At the end of 2009, the ever indifferent Kimi decided he was bored of F1 and went off to join WRC. 2 years later, he decided he was bored of this as well and returned to Formula 1 in 2012 with Lotus alongside Romain Grosjean. He clearly lost none of his speed, as Lotus had usurped Mercedes as the 4th fastest team that year. He got several podiums, and at Abu Dhabi, the team left him alone because he knew what he was doing, and he won the race, and he eventually finished 3rd in the standings. 2013 was much of the same. He won the first race, but nobody could stop Sebastian Vettel that year. For 2014, he moved back to Ferrari alongside former title rival Fernando Alonso. 2014 was poor, but for 2015 he was joined by Sebastian Vettel and the car improved enormously to become 2nd fastest behind the unstoppable Mercedes. For the next 4 years, he acted as Vettel's wingman in his ultimately unsuccessful attempts to take the title. Podiums were a regular occurrence, despite the team apparently forgetting he was in the race often and giving him questionable race strategies. He managed to win the United States Grand Prix in 2018, more than 100 races after his last win. Finally. For 2019, he moved to the team it all began with, Alfa Romeo. He continues to race at the back, is the oldest driver on the grid, and now the most experienced Formula 1 driver in history. In 157 races, he got 3 wins, 41 podiums, 2 poles, 11 fastest laps, and 1,280 points. In 9th is Charles Leclerc. Leclerc's story is one of great highs and great lows. He was winning races in the FIA Formula 3 European Championship in 2015 when his godfather Jules Bianchi died, and while racing in Formula 2 in 2017, his father Hervé died. Leclerc would go on to win the title and the following year debuted in Formula 1 with Sauber. He ran rings around experienced teammate Marcus Ericsson, and in 2019 got the big break many felt he deserved by signing with Ferrari alongside Sebastian Vettel. The car was unstable and difficult to control, but Leclerc seemed to have better truck with it than Vettel did. He got pole at Bahrain, but failed to win after his car's V6 became a V5. He got his first win at Spa, however the weekend was overshadowed by the death of Formula 2 driver Antoine Hubert. The following weekend he was able to celebrate fully by winning at Monza in front of the Tifosi. Ferrari lost a lot of their pace in the final part of the season after they were forced to tune their questionable power units down. Despite a twitchy car and dodgy Ferrari strategies, Leclerc got the most poles that year with 7 and proved a star of the future. There were, however, a few rookie errors, such as crashing in qualifying at Baku and during the race at Monaco while trying to make up ground. He continues to race at Ferrari, who hopefully will re-find the form they're renowned for. In 42 races, he got 2 wins, 10 podiums, 7 poles, 4 fastest laps and 303 points. In 8th is Valtteri Bottas. The mild-mannered Finn gets a lot of stick, as he is essentially the Rubens Barrichello of the Mercedes era. He first started at Williams in 2013. He scored points only once in 2013, but for 2014 the car was much improved, and over the next 3 years he consistently scored points and podiums and showed great promise. At the end of 2016, Nico Rosberg unexpectedly announced his retirement from Formula 1, so his seat at Mercedes went to Bottas, who now had Lewis Hamilton as his teammate. He was a good second driver and wingman in his first year with the team, supporting Hamilton's title challenge against Sebastian Vettel and picking up a few race wins of his own. 2018 wasn't so strong. He was now being outpaced by the Red Bulls. A potential win at Baku was taken away by a puncture, and a virtually guaranteed win at Sochi was taken away by team orders. For 2019, Mercedes' rivals had dropped away, and he claimed he could now fight for the title. The season started reasonably well with him winning the first race. Hamilton and Bottas between them got several 1-2 finishes at the start, but he crashed out in the rain at Germany, and from then on the title slipped away, which wasn't helped by a brief surge in form by Ferrari. He won 2 more races near the end, but by then it was too late. He's still at Mercedes, but is always number 2 to Hamilton. Bottas is fast, especially in qualifying where the difference between the two is marginal. He's also a very clean driver who doesn't crash often or bump wheels of other drivers. However, he is far too docile in wheel-to-wheel racing and too often makes small but costly errors that give Hamilton a window to walk all over him. In 139 races, he got 7 wins, 45 podiums, 11 poles, 13 fastest laps and 1,289 points. In 7th is Jenson Button. Consistently popular, Button had a very long and very varied career in Formula 1. He raced for the entire 2000s, mostly in the midfield, and picked up his first win 6 years after his debut. A fruitless 2008 ended with Honda pulling out of F1, leaving him out of a job. Ross Brawn bought out the team and renamed it Brawn GP, and in 2009 they had the famous fairy tale year where they were catapulted to the front of the grid and gave Button the championship. For 2010, Button moved to McLaren alongside Lewis Hamilton to form a British dream team of the last 2 championship winners. The 2 of them were caught in a 6-way battle with Ferrari and Red Bull. Button had a very good year, including winning the Australian Grand Prix with a 52-lap stint on soft tyres. It was such a competitive season, however, that he was just pushed out of contention before the end of the season and finished 5th. In 2011, he drove far better than his crash-prone teammate and put in an outstanding performance at the rain-soaked Canadian Grand Prix, where he pitted 6 times and came back from last place to take the lead and the win on the last lap. He finished runner-up to Vettel that year, who no one could hold a candle to. Some much-needed competitiveness came back for 2012, but Button had races where he either had reliability problems or was just inexplicably slow and would finish miles out of the points. He picked up his final 3 wins that year, as from then on McLaren were in a gradual decline. He didn't manage a single podium in 2013 and had an overly ambitious teammate in Sergio Perez who liked to get in his way. There was a small upturn in form in 2014, but he managed only 1 podium at the first race. 2015 was calamitous. The car was slow, had no power and was unreliable, and he had another new teammate in Fernando Alonso who was lacking in congeniality, to say the least. 2016 was much of the same, with points being rare but grid penalties being found in abundance. He decided that was enough after over 300 starts, but made one final appearance by stepping in for Alonso at Monaco in 2017, where he flipped Pascal Wehrlein up on his side and then left the sport for good. Button has consistently received praise for his very smooth driving style, which meant he was very easy on the tyres, didn't crash often, and was especially good in changeable conditions. There was, however, a very narrow window in terms of car setup in which he was comfortable driving. He was known as a playboy in his early career, and enjoyed immense popularity during the peaks with Brawn and McLaren, but gradually faded away and quietly left after several years with cars not befitting a champion. In 136 races, he got 7 wins, 26 podiums, 1 pole, 6 fastest laps, and 908 points. In 6th is Daniel Ricciardo. The Honey Badger is by far the highest ranked HRT driver on this list, though that's not exactly what he's best remembered for. Red Bull paid HRT to allow him to drive for them in 2011, and then the following year he was promoted to Toro Rosso. 2 commendable years there were enough for him to beat teammate Jean-Eric Vergne to the vacant seat at Red Bull, who had just won 4 consecutive drivers and constructors titles with Ricciardo's new teammate Sebastian Vettel. He was expected to play a supporting role to the 4-time champion, but that proved not to be the case. Red Bull no longer had the fastest car, but Ricciardo still scored 3 wins to Vettel's 0 and outscored him by 71 points. This was enough for Vettel to leave the team early and move to Ferrari. Ricciardo's new teammate was Daniel Kvyat, but the 2015 car was even less competitive and he only scored 2 podiums and was narrowly outscored by Kvyat. The car improved in 2016, though that year was still a Mercedes washout, and early on in the season Kvyat was replaced by Max Verstappen, who had no intention of playing second fiddle to the team leader. Ricciardo won at Sepang and would have won at Monaco if not for an unnecessary pit stop call that put it behind Lewis Hamilton and left him visibly furious on the podium. In 2017, Ricciardo had 1 win to Verstappen's 2, but finished ahead in the standings as he crashed less and had better reliability. Things took a noticeable downturn in 2018. He started the season far better than Verstappen by taking an iconic win at China, but then the two collided in Baku. He redeemed himself to win at Monaco, despite a large loss of power early on in the race, but after this he would never get another podium after suffering 6 engine failures. In the summer break he announced a surprise move to midfield team Renault. It was a slightly shaky year as many felt he'd shot himself in the foot, but ultimately the right decision as he had been usurped at Red Bull. He had a much stronger 2020 and for 2021 is moving to McLaren. He has the makings of a champion, but whether or not he'll ever become one remains to be seen. In 171 races he got 7 wins, 29 podiums, 3 poles, 13 fastest laps and 1040 points. In 5th is Fernando Alonso. Alonso is possibly the greatest driver of his generation. His speed is undeniable, and there are few drivers who work harder and put more effort in than him, but he's not exactly known for being a team player. In the 2000s, he ended the Schumacher era by winning 2 titles with Renault in 2005 and 2006, and had an infamous rivalry with rookie Lewis Hamilton in 2007 that cost both of them the championship. For 2010 he moved to Ferrari and won on his debut. He was competitive all season and looked set to win the title at Abu Dhabi, but after yet another dodgy strategy call by Ferrari, he got stuck behind Vitaly Petrov for the entire race and the title went to Sebastian Vettel. He outscored himself in 2011, despite winning only 1 race to 2010's 5, but had no chance at the title. In 2012, Ferrari produced an absolute dog of a car, but Alonso pulled out results no one could have expected and had a 40-point lead after the European Grand Prix. He was a regular podium finisher after the summer break, but twice he was taken out by accidents caused by Romain Grosjean, and once again he narrowly lost the title to Vettel at the final race. 2013 went much like 2011 and Ferrari had lost their edge in 2014, so he made an ultimately uninspired decision to move back to McLaren for 2015. He spent the next 4 years in an underpowered, unreliable backmarker car and had no qualms expressing his discontent about the situation, and many times he would simply pull up in the garage if points weren't on the cards. He also got involved in big accidents, such as being sent into a barrel roll by Esteban Gutierrez at Australia in 2016 and vaulting Charles Leclerc's car at Spa in 2018. 2018 itself saw a small uptake in form, and he enjoyed a good rapport with teammate Stoffel Vandoorne, but he decided to retire as he was now dabbling in the WEC and was attempting to claim the Triple Crown of Motorsport, but that didn't work, so now he's coming back to drive for Renault again. In 173 races, he got 11 wins, 44 podiums, 4 poles, 9 fastest laps and 1,233 points. In fourth is Nico Rosberg. The son of a champion, Rosberg had big boots to fill when he debuted at Williams in 2006. He was a pretty solid midfielder who got the occasional podium finish. He moved to the newly revamped Mercedes team for 2010 to partner none other than Michael Schumacher. Schumacher definitely lost his speed and was made to look amateur by the much younger Rosberg, who regularly scored points and the occasional podium. In 2012, he took his first pole and win at Shanghai, despite the car's pace being wildly inconsistent across the year. Schumacher retired again at the end of 2012 and was replaced by Lewis Hamilton, which would herald the arrival of an iconic rivalry akin to Prost and Senna. In 2013, the two would routinely qualify fastest by an enormous margin but eat through their tyres and lose out to Sebastian Vettel in the race. Rosberg had the edge over Hamilton that year and got 2 wins. The introduction of new hybrid engines in 2014 thrust Mercedes to the front of the grid, and from here on the battle for race wins would almost exclusively be between Rosberg and Hamilton, neither of which had any intention of playing second fiddle to the other. The two had a great fight for the win at Bahrain, going back and forth on the last few laps. At Monaco, Rosberg apparently deliberately slid into an escape road in qualifying in order to mess up Hamilton's flying lap, which gave Rosberg the pole and the win. Rosberg gave Hamilton a puncture on the second lap at Spa and was booed by the crowds at the podium ceremony. In the end, Hamilton won the title that year after mechanical problems basically denied Rosberg any chance at fighting it at the final race in Abu Dhabi. The car was just as dominant in 2015, but once again Hamilton came out on top in the standings. Rosberg was rejuvenated for 2016 and determined to take the fight even more to Hamilton. He won the first 4 races, and then their rivalry reached its peak when he collided with Hamilton on the first lap at Catalonia and took them both out of the race. They collided again on the last lap at Austria while fighting for the lead, and the wing damage dropped Rosberg to 4th. Hamilton was closing in on Rosberg's lead, and Rosberg started taking counselling and went as far as cutting strands of fabric off of his gloves in order to save weight. A mechanical failure for Hamilton at Sepang proved costly, and despite Rosberg finishing second in all of the last 4 races, and Hamilton deliberately backing him up into the other drivers in the final race at Abu Dhabi, Rosberg came through to emulate his father Keke and win the 2016 drivers' title. 5 days after this, he blindsided the entire Formula One world by announcing his immediate retirement from Formula One, stating he had reached his peak and wished to spend more time with his family. He was accused of cowardice by some, as it was seen as unlikely that he would beat Hamilton to the title again, but there's no shame in leaving on a high rather than potentially languishing at the back of the grid and ruining your reputation. The performance of his successor, however, has improved his reputation somewhat, and he helped people to appreciate how fast he was and what a hard racer he could be. Even if he wasn't always the fastest guy, he wasn't ever prepared to surrender to Hamilton. In 139 races, he got 23 wins, 55 podiums, 30 poles, 15 fastest laps, and 1,819 points. Time for the podium finishers. Have you guessed who they are yet? First up, in 3rd place, is Max Verstappen. Verstappen is the kind of talent that comes along only once or twice in a generation. His father Jos raced in Formula One in the 90s and 2000s, and became a strict but effective mentor to his son. Max made headlines in 2015 when he signed for Toro Rosso, having spent only 1 year in single-seaters prior, and being a mere 17 years old. He took to the car like a duck to water, and massively outscored fellow rookie teammate Carlos Sainz. 5 races into 2016, he was promoted to Red Bull in place of Daniel Kvyat, and won his first race with the team, which was helped in part by the Mercs taking each other out, and became the youngest race winner in Formula One history. Verstappen showed he had limitless speed, but was also becoming excessively aggressive and impatient. He had a massive crash with Romain Grosjean at Monaco in 2015, and at Spa in 2016 he was barging other drivers off the road. At Brazil that year, he put in one of the great wet weather drives after he spun early on but came back from 16th to finish 3rd in the final 15 laps. In 2017 he was plagued with mechanical issues but had a surge in form towards the end of the season and won 2 races. In 2018 the fractures in the team began to show. Verstappen was clearly being favoured over Daniel Ricciardo, but at Shanghai he sent Sebastian Vettel into a spin during a botched overtake while Ricciardo won the race, and at Baku the 2 teammates collided. He then crashed in practice at Monaco and had to start last. He began to improve after this and took a famous win at Austria in front of the Orange Army. At COTA, he went from 18th to 2nd and just missed out on his first pole position at Mexico, but still won the race. For 2019, Ricciardo was gone to be replaced by Pierre Gasly, who proved totally inadequate for the job and provided no competition for Verstappen. Max had shrugged off most of his bad habits and won at Austria after passing Charles Leclerc on the last lap, though he was criticised for the aggressiveness of the move, and took another great win in the wet at Hockenheim. It began to look like he could challenge Hamilton for the title, but he crashed out on the first lap at Spa, and Ferrari saw a brief uptake in form. He was leading in Brazil when Esteban Ocon sent him into a spin while attempting to unlap himself. He still won the race, but was furious and was physically threatening Ocon in Parc Fermé. 2020 was a near flawless year that resulted in only 2 wins, and after several years staring into the diffuser of a Mercedes in every race, it must surely be a matter of time before he can go one step further and win the title. The kid's fast, extremely fast. He's incredibly focused and disciplined, but despite being in Formula 1 for 6 years now, he still gets impatient and makes costly errors in races rather than thinking about the long game. He has plenty of time to grow though. He's still only 23, which was the same age that Lewis Hamilton made his debut in Formula 1. In 102 races, he got 8 wins, 31 podiums, 2 poles, 7 fastest laps and 948 points. Second place goes to Sebastian Vettel. Vettel's early career in many respects can be viewed in a similar manner to Verstappen's. He did one race with BMW Sauber in 2007 but made his full-time debut with Toro Rosso aged only 19. He proved he was a star by winning the Italian Grand Prix in 2008 and became the youngest race winner in F1 history. He moved to Red Bull for 2009 and ultimately finished second in the championship to Jenson Button. For 2010, he was seen as many people's favourite to win the title, but there were numerous stumbling blocks along the way. He was leading the season opening Bahrain Grand Prix, but lost 2 cylinders in the engine and dropped to 4th. He then spun out from the lead at Australia after the brakes failed. The first major dent in his relationship with teammate Mark Webber occurred when he crashed into him when trying to pass at Turkey and was knocked out of the race. The team's favouritism towards Vettel became clear at Silverstone when Vettel broke his front wing in practice, and the new front wing on Mark Webber's car was removed and put on Vettel's instead. Webber ended up winning the race after Vettel got a puncture on the first lap. At Spa, he speared into the back of Jenson Button and then received a penalty which left him 15th. And in Korea, he retired with an engine failure while leading. Despite these numerous setbacks, he won 5 races and got 10 pole positions, and even though he'd never led the championship, he came through from behind to win his first title and become Formula 1's youngest world champion. 2011 was a cakewalk for Vettel. Red Bull had by far the fastest car, and despite numerous attempts by rival teams to topple Red Bull with accusations of illegal components such as the exhaust-blown diffuser, Vettel won 11 races and won his second title at Japan with 4 races remaining. In 2012, Red Bull seemed to have been toppled. They had problems in pre-season testing, and it was all to play for in the first half of the season where Vettel won only 1 race, retired from another from the lead, and was famously given a puncture by Narain Karthikeyan in Sepang. Post-summer break, he was on awesome form and won 4 races in a row. The title went down to the wire between him and Fernando Alonso in Brazil. Vettel was sent into a spin on the first lap and took damage to the car's floor. It all seemed to be over, but he drove like a champion to climb back up to 6th in variable conditions without a working team radio to claim his 3rd consecutive title. In 2013, he once again blew everyone out of the water. His relationship with Mark Webber completely disintegrated after he ignored team orders to maintain position in Sepang and barged his way past Webber to take the win, for which he had no remorse. After the summer break, he set a new record by winning 9 consecutive races and took his 4th consecutive title at India. Vettel seemed to be on top of the world, with no one able to stop him, and was getting booed at races for making them boring, but all that was about to change. Red Bull did not adjust well to the new rule changes in 2014, and Vettel failed to win a single race that year, while his new teammate Daniel Ricciardo won 3. He left Red Bull and moved to Ferrari for 2015, where he hoped to emulate his hero Michael Schumacher and win the title with them. Things began reasonably well. He won only his 2nd race with the team and was just in touch with the all-conquering Mercedes drivers, but a tyre blowout on the penultimate lap at Spa eliminated any chance of still winning the title. 2016 went less well, and he didn't win a single race. Ferrari produced a car capable of winning races in 2017, and he made a strong push for a 5th title against Lewis Hamilton. He was very strong in the first half of the season, despite deliberately driving into Hamilton at Baku and a puncture at Silverstone, but his championship fell apart at Singapore. He collided with teammate Kimi Raikkonen and Max Verstappen at the start and gave the win to Hamilton. He tried to bounce back, however he had to start last at Sepang and climbed up to 4th, and then broke down after only 4 laps at Suzuka. A scrappy Mexican Grand Prix gave the title to Hamilton. He tried again in 2018, but once again fell short. He won the first 2 races, but was spun around by Verstappen at Shanghai, locked up and flat spotted his tyres trying to take the lead in Baku, and crashed into Valtteri Bottas at Turn 1 in France. Most crucially though, came when he crashed out of the lead in the wet at Germany, which gave the win to Hamilton. He won in Spa, but then hit Hamilton and span in Monza, and hit Verstappen and span in Suzuka, which once again gave the title to Hamilton in Mexico. In 2019, he no longer had a fast enough car, and also had a far less submissive teammate in the form of Charles Leclerc. Vettel spun again in Bahrain, slid off the track in Canada and blocked Hamilton, which earned him a penalty that took his win away, and crashed into the back of Verstappen at Silverstone. He was now receiving a lot of criticism for constantly making rookie errors and cracking under pressure in ways beneath that of a 4-time champion, while also having to contest with a once first-class team that had completely forgotten how to do effective race strategies. He showed he still had plenty of skill in the very wet German Grand Prix, where he climbed from 20th to 2nd and was the only driver to not spin or run wide the entire race. He moved over for Leclerc in Spa, who went on to win the race, and then spun, this time on his own, at Monza. He won at Singapore, but had mechanical failures at Sochi and Kota and collided with Leclerc in Brazil. 2020 was his worst year on record, though in many respects better than the last 3, as it was clear that the car and the team had been seriously hindering him. He's now moved on to Aston Martin, where hopefully he can revive his career. Like all big names in Formula 1, opinion is very divided on Sebastian Vettel. He monopolised lights to flag victories during his championship runs, was a great qualifier, and was especially good at nailing the starts and getting himself out of DRS range. He received criticism for making mistakes when further back in the field and claimed he couldn't overtake, despite the fact he proved numerous times that he could when he had to. He was also seen as arrogant and entitled, particularly with regards to the treatment he received compared to Mark Webber. His post-Red Bull career has in many respects been a failure. 2 potential championships were lost through mechanical failures and repetitive driver error. He did become more humble and mature as a person though, and he won over a lot of fans with his sense of humour. But to win 4 consecutive titles, 2 of which by the skin of his teeth, is something only 2 other drivers have done, one of which is coming up next. In 197 races, he got 48 wins, 111 podiums, 52 poles, 35 fastest laps and 2,860 points. So, it's time for number 1, the greatest driver of the 2010s. Yep, who else was it going to be? It's Lewis Hamilton. This is a name known across the world. Hamilton has never been out of the spotlight since his debut in 2007. He made headlines upon his arrival, as he was Formula 1's first ever black driver. He'd signed for McLaren, a front-running team, which almost never happens to a rookie, and his teammate was defending champion Fernando Alonso. A sordid rivalry between them narrowly cost them both the title that year. Hamilton won it literally at the last corner of the last lap in 2008. The title in 2009 went to Jenson Button, who then joined Hamilton at McLaren in 2010. Hamilton was embroiled in a 5-way title battle that year. For a while it looked like he could take it, but collisions with Felipe Massa in Monza and Mark Webber in Singapore meant he eventually finished 4th. 2011 did not go so well. He had race-ending collisions with his teammate in Canada and with Kamui Kobayashi in Spa, and had no less than 6 collisions with Felipe Massa throughout the year. In 2012, he decided he'd had enough of the team that had raised and nurtured him. He was caught up in accidents that weren't his fault in Valencia, Spa and Brazil. The team botched several pit stops, and he retired from 3 races with mechanical failures, while leading. The poor relationship with the team became clear after qualifying at Spa, when Hamilton published confidential telemetry data on Twitter after accusing the team of giving a different rear wing to Button. After retiring from Singapore, he made the decision to move to Mercedes. He received consternation for this, as Mercedes was seen as an upper midfield team that would kill his career. How wrong that was. 2013 was an average first year. He would eat his way through tyres in the race, sometimes literally, but everything changed in 2014. Mercedes produced a first-rate hybrid power unit, and Hamilton and teammate Nico Rosberg were now untouchable. Despite 2 mechanical failures, 1 race-ending collision with Rosberg, and Rosberg's attempt at mind games, Hamilton got 6 pole positions and 11 wins to claim his second championship, 6 years after the first one. 2015 went even better, and he won his 3rd championship with 3 races remaining. In 2016, Rosberg hit back much harder. Bad luck, small errors, and a crash with Rosberg meant it wasn't until the 5th round that he won a race. There was another collision with Rosberg in Austria, which Hamilton won, and he began to eat into Rosberg's lead, but his catch-up took a major hit when he suffered an engine failure while leading in Sepang. Despite winning the final 4 races, he finished 2nd in the championship that year to Rosberg, who then retired. Rosberg's successor Valtteri Bottas proved to be much more compliant and far less of a thorn in Hamilton's side, but he had a new old title rival in the Ferrari of Sebastian Vettel. The two went back and forth in the first half of the season, and it looked like Mercedes' dominance had come to an end. Not only did their pace slow down, but there were small flaws in this usually well-oiled machine, such as botching a pit stop in Australia and pitting Hamilton in Baku to fix his loose headrest. After the summer break though, a mixture of crashes and reliability problems in the Ferrari camp gave Hamilton an easy run to his 4th championship. 2018 began in a similar fashion to 2017, with Vettel initially taking the lead. The big flip happened at Germany, where Vettel spun off from the lead when the rain began, and Hamilton put in one of his greatest ever drives to win from 14th on the grid. In the second half, he once again had an easy run to title number 5 with 6 wins from 9 races. In 2019, Mercedes once again found their dominant form, and most of the challenge came from his teammate, though it wasn't a particularly strong one. He had a poor German Grand Prix where he spun off twice and had a pit stop that lasted over a minute, and he received a penalty in Brazil for a collision with Alex Albon, but that didn't stop title number 6 happening after his title rivals spent more time taking points off of each other. He walked the championship in 2020 with little to no challenge from anyone and matched Michael Schumacher to win his 7th title with another world-class performance in the wet at Istanbul. It's hard to know where to begin with Lewis Hamilton. He's one of the most well-rounded drivers in motorsport history. His pace is unmatchable in both qualifying and the race. He's an extremely aggressive racer, although that sometimes is to his detriment as he's been involved in several big accidents in his career and has often driven the car beyond its limits and had greater reliability problems than his teammates. He left McLaren at the perfect time and found a new home in Mercedes, who built the team around him and allowed him to expand the brand of Lewis Hamilton. He's passionate about fashion as an ambassador for Tommy Hilfiger, and receives both praise and criticism for his outspoken political views and activism with causes near and dear to him. He's now 36 and is just as fast as ever. In 198 races, he got 73 wins, 129 podiums, 71 poles, 44 fastest laps, and 3,175 points. He's broken almost every record under the sun, and as such is deservingly called the greatest Formula 1 driver of the 2010s. Whew, so that's it. That took longer than I thought it would. Hope you all stuck around to the end. If you think someone else should be number 1 or anyone else should be placed differently, let me know. Don't forget to like, comment, share and subscribe. Follow me on Twitter at Brook_F1 and I'll see you all next time.